course, I apologize for this. This is entirely my fault. Very sorry about this. This is quite simply because I put on the microphone and the video camera, but I didn't actually formally start the webinar. So hence, I've been trying to check whether the sound was not working, which has happened before. But yes, I guess the sound is all right. Yeah, it's just I hadn't started the I hadn't started the video, the webinar. Okay. This is after 9 years of doing webinars, having done several hundred. I don't. No, I have actually tried. I have actually done this. I have made this mistake once before, I think. All right, here we are. Welcome. Oh dear. All right. So look, without further ado, we're going to start the text. Kindly generate the enlightened attitude that we're doing this ultimately with the intention to be able to benefit others relatively, and ultimately establish them in at the level of perfect enlightenment. And like I was saying, speaking to myself before, Steven sadly passed away recently. Our author sadly passed away recently, and but nevertheless, he left behind this this wonderful work that presents in a very comprehensive form, really a topic that very often is approached with some fear and trepidation. At the same time, I think this will be fine. I think Steven's approaching it very gently, and what we first are doing is really sort of set the scene, really, in terms of the background. So without then further ado, so the Buddha's decision to teach. So Steven writes, I would like to present a brief summary of the very first teachings that the one born as Siddhartha Gautama, who later came to be known as the Buddha, imparted in Sarnath, India. Teachings that he gave for the first time publicly after his awakening. The Sanskrit word Buddha means having awakened. Tradition reports that something rather astounding occurred after his awakening. The Buddha is alleged to have not wanted to teach others about the insights that had arisen for him upon that occasion. He said that the Dharma was too deep and its importance so difficult to communicate that he preferred not to. And in the Tibetan rendition, then it says, Sachichodorosa Dumaje, Dutitawe, Chusik, Dagi Nye, Sula, Machang, Goa Minjurwe, Mime, Bebe Tsel la Nepargi, which means I have found something that is profound, peaceful, free from conceptual constructions, luminous, and it's something that's not fabricated, it's not compounded. It is a truth which is like the purest nectar. Yet, if I were to speak of it, nobody would understand, and hence I'd rather remain quietly here in the forest. And then Steven continues, traditional accounts such as the Request Sutra, Ayachana Sutta, report that an apparitional being, what we might call a sprite, by the name Brahma Sahampati said to the Buddha, you have to teach. And Buddha said no. Sahampati said why? And the Buddha replied, because the Dharma is deep and difficult to understand. The Buddha then stated, if I were to teach the Dharma, and if others would not understand me, that would be tiresome for me, troublesome for me. And actually, then there is there's a reference to this place in the sutta, and we can just actually I think it's not very. Let's just read a little bit of it. I just think it's nice to sort of just go a little bit in depth with this. So the sutta, which is called the Ayachana Sutta, the request, it then says here in Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation, I have heard that on one occasion, when the Blessed One was newly self-awakened, he was staying at Uruvela on the bank of the Naranjana river at the foot of the goatherd's banyan tree. Then, while he was alone and in seclusion, this line of thinking arose in his awareness. This Dharma that I have attained is deep, hard to see, hard to realize, peaceful, refined, beyond the scope of conjecture, subtle, to be experienced by the wise. But this generation delights in attachment, is excited by attachment, enjoys attachment. For a generation delighting in attachment, excited by attachment, enjoying attachment, that conditionality and dependent co-arising are hard to see. This state too is hard to see. The resolution of all fabrications, the relinquishments of all acquisitions, the ending of craving, dispassion, cessation, unbinding. And if I were to teach the Dharma, if others would not understand me, that would be tiresome for me, troublesome for me. So then the sutra continues there. So then Stephen continues, this sprite, this sort of apparitional being, it then goes on to say to the Buddha that he must teach anyway, because he has always taught in the past. And furthermore, now again, upon his realization, it is time to share and to teach the appropriate ways to use this precious medicine of the Dharma to cure the painful conditions of living beings. So this sprite is referring to the Buddha's previous lives as a bodhisattva. And by the way, incidentally, this coming from the Pali Canon is one of countless examples of how, despite what some people might say, the Pali Canon is littered with references to the Buddha's previous lives and about the whole notion of rebirth in general. Sometimes you have sort of a new wave Buddhist approach, which would say, oh yeah, in Buddhism they don't really talk about rebirth. It's only in later. It's a sort of an invention later on that we speak about rebirth, and it's actually not something that we find in the Pali Canon. That is not true. There's countless references to the Buddha's previous lives and to the whole condition, really, of sentient beings wandering in samsara. Anyway, so then the Buddha, after a moment of reflection, replied that Brahma Sampati was right. The Buddha realized that in the past he came to the same point, and therefore he must teach. Thereupon the Buddha walked to modern-day Sarnath, and there he delivered a discourse wherein he is said to have talked about the path for the very first time. This discourse came to be called Turning the Wheel of the Dharma. And actually I found this also, and what I can do is I can upload them. These basically talk about the Four Noble Truths. But what is then interesting here is this is where they use this word turning the wheel. So this is a general, universal to all the various Buddhist traditions, referring to when the Buddha teaches. This is then called the turning the wheel of the Dharma. So that this discourse that's referred to there, and which we can find in the Pali Canon, is then the discourse on the Four Noble Truths. So, Stephen says, why recount this story? Because if the Buddha himself was not in such a hurry, and if the Buddha reflected on the profundity, the non-obvious nature, and the difficulty and the importance of the Dharma, then perhaps we might also be encouraged not to become too anxious about our ability to quickly understand the totality and the depth of his teaching in a short period of time. You know, this so often happens, you know, that people come to the Buddhist teaching, and because there's not just sort of a notion that if you sign here and you join the church, everything's going to be fine, you know. Rather, it is a bit like anything. It's a study. It's a science. It's not a science in the sense of something, this kind of science we use in engineering or in the ordinary sort of way of we understanding science in terms of how to work with objective phenomena or material phenomena. It's a science of the mind. And so there is a lot to be learned about this. And it's almost indispensable for us, and particularly us then who come with a background in being analytically trained and very much encouraged to think critically. It's almost indispensable that we could just approach meditation and so on in this sort of simple-minded way of just it being sort of a feel-good thing, to really understand the depth of what Buddhism is about. It is really to understand how do we eliminate confusion altogether from the mind. How is confusion constructed? How is it that we misunderstand reality, and how could we approach this? What does the Buddha have to teach about this? And that's where we have a genuine science of the mind. So that's where sometimes it could be a little bit daunting, when we approach the Buddhist teaching thinking, oh my God, this is really, there's a lot. But at the same time, it's also something that continually touches on our experience. So it's never ever sort of a trivial undertaking in any way. So anyway, here we have it from the Buddha that there's no doubt that it's not something even the Buddha assumed we'd easily understand. At the same time, it can be understood very much. So the noble insights. Within the context of that first discourse, the Buddha, the one who had awakened, spoke of 4 insights. Steven says, I would now like to contextualize the traditional account of how talk of path and view arose in the experience of the Buddha. Only after a difficult and long period of study and reflection did the Buddha come to an awakening. It was in the context of the very first recorded teaching that he said there were 4 certainties about reality, the 4 noble truths. So we have looked at this previously in Peter della Santina's work, Tree of Enlightenment, but it's really something that we can't actually study the 4 truths enough, frankly speaking. So the truth of suffering, dukkha, the truth of the causes of suffering, samudaya, the truth of the cessation of suffering, nirodha, the truth of the way or path, marga, to the cessation of suffering. The term he used for certainty was the Sanskrit word satya, which is sometimes translated as truth. However, this word satya comes from the Sanskrit word as, which means that which is, that which exists, that which is actually the case. Hence, it is what is true in the sense of what it is in accord with reality. In the sense of what it is in accord with reality. So it's really, truth is not here something that we just accept as being that's how it is, but it's really about us really observing whether or not what is being spoken here makes sense to us. Stephen continues, it is what is real. Truth is what is in accord with what is real. To translate the full meaning of the word satya, most languages would need to use 2 words with 2 slightly different flavors, reality and truth. Which one of the 2 is best to translate the Sanskrit word satya? Most English language books on Buddhism translate it as truth. So we commonly see the phrase Buddha's 4 noble truths. But the flavor of the word reality is a little bit different. The Sanskrit word satya can mean what is real, truly real, or actually real. In Western philosophy, one sometimes finds a correspondence theory of truth. So truth is what corresponds to what is taken as the real state of things. It is a friend of reality. It is not fighting it. It works with it. And of course, some of us might have come across this sort of postmodern quandary really when you hear somebody says, well, Buddhism is about the truth, then many of us are sort of programmed to say, hey, wait a minute, is there such a thing as truth? is there really truth? And some philosophers would obviously argue, well, we don't really have truth. You have Derrida, who would say there's no such a thing as truth as with a capital T and so forth. And that's in some way true, but also not true. And that's where Buddhism brilliantly has what we call the two levels of truth. Because there's the reality as it appears to us in our ordinary condition, and then there's reality that actually the way it is when we analyze. But either way, truth then is understood here in terms of not a dogma, not some sort of metaphysical proposition, but very much what we can observe and what we can verify. So that's again where we come down to where it is a bit of a problem if Buddhism is understood as a religion, and that it makes much more sense then, as we then have in science, really, that we talk about a correspondence theory, or that we talk about that the subject of science is a reality. So that's an important point, and this is really sort of honing in on what Buddhism is about. So, and also what the Buddha was about in terms of his teachings. So Stephen continues, in the Indian context, there is a strong sense that when the Buddha spoke about these four satyas, he was talking about two senses of the term, what is actual and real, and what corresponds with that. In addition to these two senses, the Buddha noted that these truths and the reality they corresponded to were not easily understood or even commonly accepted truths. He had discovered or awoken to noble truths, Arya Satya. The point here is that the very first teaching of his was not a talk about ordinary reality, nor was this an ordinary talk about reality, nor was this an ordinary talk about what corresponds to reality. The term he chose to signify what was not ordinary was the term noble, Arya. It modifies the term reality. These truths or realities were noble and non-ordinary. So of course we sometimes would speak about the Four Noble Truths as corresponding to the methodology that you find in medicine. Is there an illness? Is there a corresponding cause? Can it be cured? And what is then the course of remedy? And that's where then the vision here is that this is something that can be cured and there is a way out. Then this qualifies it as being more than just an ordinary sort of general or maybe even trivial observation of what is. It really points to something greater. So we talk about the noble truth. Stephen says, in many accounts of Buddhism, one finds the word Arya often translated as noble. But when you hear this word, what does it mean? It carries the sense of that which is above the ordinary. It has a sense of dignity and nobility, something valuable, something most worthy of note. And that, of course, is an understatement. This is the Buddha pointing to the nature of reality beyond suffering. So Stephen continues here then, the Buddha is discoursing on truth or realities that are not common. These are valuable, precious, and not corruptible. Their nature won't change. There could be so many ways to translate the adjective Arya into Tibetan, because the Tibetans have many words for honorable, dignified, incorruptible, and valuable. Let's see what the footnote here says. If you think linguistics is not important, if you think linguistics is not important, I would remind you of the words of the Mahasiddha Kanha, who once said that the path is blocked by vowels and consonants. So there you go. The path is blocked by these vowels and consonants, but then again, we can also use them to unblock. So that's, say, the skillful means of the path. So the Tibetans would have many words for Arya, but Stephen here at the bottom of the page then says, but they chose the words Phakpa, which means to be above or to rise above or to go beyond the ordinary. The Buddha was not talking about what common people take to be real, the so-called truth of the marketplace, that of samsaric perspective, but rather something Arya, something elevated beyond that and hence noble. And so here also we could say that what we ordinarily call science is something that observes what we generally assert as being our reality, but it doesn't really take into account the confused projections that is sort of our shared experience, and the way that we misunderstand and miss reality and operate really on a place of misperceiving reality. General materialist science doesn't actually take that into account. So we have really what we could call a pretty ordinary or confined science. Whereas what the Buddha is talking about is then that which is beyond the ordinary confinement of the limited subjectivity. And that's, of course, where we then have the scope of an awakened person, an awakened being, a sublime being. And also sublime then is that we have the same word, Arya or Pakpa. So this that we're seeing is Arya, it is Pakpa, it's sublime from the point of view of the object, but it's also sublime from the point of view that it reflects the scope of the subject or the individual that sees it. So basically what we're talking about here is the scope of seeing wider, seeing in a greater way. So as far as these Four Noble Truths go, then the first insight, and here Stephen used an interesting term, crowded space. You know, so often that we hear persons who would like to sort of elaborate on the linguistics, they'll say, oh, suffering is a terrible translation and it's much more complex than that. So then we have terms like pain and so on. But yes, there's a lot of understanding of what we mean with the truth of suffering. Dukkha, and I think Bhikkhu Bodhi, he uses the word stress, and Stephen here is proposing crowded space, but it refers to this dissatisfaction, the sort of the condition of things aren't quite right somehow. And this, of course, can come from, this ranges all the way from a deep sort of a sense of existential discomfort right up to actual serious suffering. So first insight, crowded space. Precisely what were these noble truths or insight, these unusual and profound realities which the Buddha hesitated to speak of in the first place? What the Buddha said is that there are many things that might characterize the life of a living being. He wanted to isolate one predominant tendency and give it first place. He did not say that this is the only experience that living beings have, but he wanted to give first place to an observation that totally transformed him, that awakened him. And the word he chose, of all the words he could have chosen to talk about, the wide variety of experience that human beings undergo, was a very strange word with extremely strange translations. He chose the word dukkha, a word which is usually translated into English as suffering or sometimes pain. Let's examine the Sanskrit word dukkha. The first part, du, is related to this Greek prefix dis, and the English prefix dis, as for instance, the word dysfunctional. This means something is not working well. It modifies the next part of the word, which is ka, meaning space. Together, dukkha, just going by the formation of the word itself, might convey a sense of space that is a bit off, out of joint, crowded or cramped. Actually, one of our friends just a couple of weeks ago was volunteering some of the reference to the cart, where the wheel is not properly joined, and hence it's a bit out of whack. And that's also one way of understanding the term dukkha. So in that crowded space, things don't work well. Hence, they are unsatisfactory, and by association, they are painful. One of the earliest occurrences of the word dukkha seems to be the description of a bull cart in which the axles are dukkha, meaning out of the groove. Oh, there you go. So that the cart cannot roll on. It is dysfunctional. Now, the opposite of this is the Sanskrit word sukha. Su is related to the Greek prefix ö, and so or you, as in the word euphonious. So, I hope I pronounced that correctly. Sukha is space that is harmonious. Usually, which I guess is what euphonious means, harmonious. Usually, however, the word sukha is translated as bliss or well-being. We might say that for most people, many experiences arise as being crowded. They are potentially or actually suffused with suffering or the cause of suffering. The Sanskrit expression for this is sarvam dukkam. Everything is painful. But it's not obvious what this actually means, and it seems to not correspond to our experiences of happiness and well-being, right? It takes a great deal of study and practice to come to a deep, certain, and settled understanding of what sarvam dukkam means according to the Buddha Dharma, and why, in spite of it, life is still worth living. Well, obviously, when we're saying sarvam dukkam, we are talking about this essentially dysfunctional condition that happens at the time of ignorance. And this is what the Buddha set out to remedy. So sarva dukkam refers to, you could say, the half-life that is samsara. And of course, what the Buddha awoke to is then snapping out of this, you could say, dysfunctional condition and awakening to what life really is. So while we might temporarily, or rather in the condition of our cognitive dysfunction, experience samsara, life itself, in and of itself, reality in and of itself, of course, certainly is worth living. And so the underlying condition really, and what the Buddha was pointing to, is that there is sukha, but for the time being, there is a harmony, there is bliss, there's well-being, life is worth living. But for the time being, as long as there is this dysfunctional condition, then there is suffering. So from this point of view, then, of course, the Buddha really approached this in a bit like a doctor or a physicist physician who sees a curable condition that is worth addressing. Okay, let's see if there's some questions. Wow. Oh no, this was all about the sound. Okay, thank you very much. We have, thank you to our person, our Greek person. Thank you very much. EU in Greek is pronounced F or Ev, depending on the following letter. Okay. Same applies for AU, by the way. Thank you. All right. So, like for example, it's interesting because in English, when you pronounce, like for example, you have the word Europe, you have the word eudaimonia, you have this EU, but then we sort of tend to say you. But in Greek, then it would be F or Ev. Okay, thank you. And then, sorry for going off the subject content here. I was wondering just today about whether Buddhism subscribes to apparitional beings, and now we are hearing about a sprite. Are these beings available to call on to support our practice? If so, how? Are they a part of our own mind? Thank you. This is interesting because that again sort of reflects really the confined science that we have, which actually doesn't really operate with anything beyond just what can be observed by a pretty ordinary subjectivity. And so yes, there's a whole cosmology that's absent in the materialist, what we could call the eliminativist perspective, those that eliminate anything that's not hard, observable science, right? So for such persons, even consciousness is even questionable, you know? And so there certainly is absent in the modern scientific view any awareness of beings that don't have a body. This, however, is not the case with, say, for the sages and for those who are less limited, and even for ordinary persons who are not so, you could say, blocked. Then a lot of beings that we don't ordinarily see are visible to sages and to many other persons. So we have a very controversial discussion around this, and very often science says, well, we think it's very nice that people like to believe in these things, but we shouldn't expect them to actually be true. And that sort of filters down in the popular discourse. And so the sort of general educated modern person would be a little bit sort of loath or hesitant to embrace the idea of spirits, sprites, ghosts, ghouls, all these kind of things. And the whole realm of most of samsara really is not something that we can generally sort of perceive. But more specifically then, are these beings available to call on to support our practice? Well, yeah, sure. But at the same time, we really are going to have to do this on our own. So we could sometimes say that when we practice well, then you could say the force of the universe supports us. So we very often attract positive energies when our energy is good. But that's also why we very often have practices that specifically are about lifting our energies. And when our energy is lifted, then also you could say the force is with us. So that's why, for example, we often do practices like the Ryu Sangche and other practices that lift us. And of course, even, the practice of the Dharma itself would be lifting us. But the idea they're part of our own mind in terms of being our imagination, yeah, sometimes we have this sort of auto-suggestive apparitions, that we imagine things. But also we when we're encountering Buddhism, we're going to be encountering a larger cosmology. It's a bigger world than we are ordinarily led to believe. Okay, good. So going from crowded space to open space. So the very first valuable, superior, and uncommon truth that truly is said to be in accord with our nature is dukkha. It corresponds to the fact that we lead our lives dukkha-like, with a lack of spaciousness. We might say then that the entire teaching of the Buddha is an instruction of how to find oneself in sukha, an expanded space, a space of well-being. Thus, the Buddha taught us how to move from dukkha to sukha. I love that. That's such a great line, What are you doing with all this Buddhist business? I'm going from dukkha to sukha. We're gonna, this is t-shirt material. Then there's a comment here. I always assumed terms like sprite or deities were actually referring to manifestations of inner knowledge. Yes, we have you could say, without sort of going into Jungian archetypes, we certainly refer to knowledge and the notion of deity as pretty much synonymous with our Buddha nature. So, for example, all Vajrayana deities are essentially Buddha nature. But sprites, or you could say tree spirits, mountain spirits, beings of the six realms, they are beings just like other humans, just like other animals. So that's, of course, where we then speak about gods, demigods, hungry ghosts, beings in the hell realms, and so forth. So these are beings just like us, who are sort of lost in one way or another. We're in the human realm, which is presently quite helpful in many ways, but it also essentially we are beings wandering in this condition of ignorance and confusion. So that's where we need to distinguish between the sort of general cosmology, the general ordinary cosmology, and then when we talk about deities, particularly in the Vajrayana sense, there we're talking about wisdom, we're talking about our Buddha nature. So the Buddha within is what we sometimes then would refer to as deity. For example, Vajrasattva, Tara, Avalokiteshvara, and so forth. These are understood as, you could say, aligned or expressions of, or you could say, corresponding to our Buddha nature. So all the practices that we do to cultivate inner knowledge on the basis of such deities is really drawing on then the already existing natural disposition of Buddha nature that we possess. So two different things here. So In this condensed presentation of the teachings of the Buddha, the concrete methods to show one how to go from dukkha to sukha, known as the path, what remains the same throughout the whole process is ka, or space. In later teachings, this is referred to as the expanse, our basic nature, our Buddha nature, and our basic goodness. The crucial point here is that our basic goodness, or Buddha nature, the great expanse of what is, has never changed. It is our experience that changes. And it is those changes which, for the most part, we regard as unwanted experiences and therefore as a source of pain and suffering. So as long as we are held by the condition of dukkha, then change is something that we suffer from. So of course, the underlying condition is unchanging. But as long as we are within the condition of dukkha, our cognitive dysfunctional condition of samsara, then we are continually discombobbled and suffering on the basis of change. So we are always experiencing change. The Buddha said that this dukkha, this crowdedness, is the disease for which the medicine of the Dharma was intended, not to make us new or different, but to concretely re-establish our basic spaciousness and our basic well-being. Many of the teachings of the Dharma encourage us to discover and then to confidently trust in our inborn natural capacity for spaciousness, our Buddha nature, our naturally arising primordial wisdom, our stainless wisdom mind. So this is where the Buddha was coming from. The Buddha was coming from a place of understanding that all beings, every single sentient being, including every sprite and every hell being and every god and every human, all sentient beings wandering in this ever-changing wheel or circle of samsara, their basic nature is this unchanging space, this basic condition, which is what Steven here refers to as a natural capacity for spaciousness, Buddha nature, and so forth. So this is where the Buddha saw that this is what we truly are, and that sentient beings unnecessarily are suffering. So that's then where the question then comes in, well, what went wrong? How come, even though we are innately pure, what is it that exactly has happened to us? Why are we not experiencing this purity? So this is then where we come to the second insight, the causes for suffering. Steven writes, the second insight is that this crowdedness and all the sufferings that follow from it is due to multiple and different conditions coming together, samudaya. Samudaya is sometimes translated as cause. What it means more precisely is the coming together or arising of the conditions for suffering. And this is how the Tibetans translated the Sanskrit term samudaya. In the Tibetan, the word is kunjung, the occurrence or arising of all the conditions pertaining to the presence of dukkha. So kunjung literally means this is where it all starts. This is where everything arises from. And this refers then to this, the cause of dukkha, of suffering. This second noble truth or insight, which seems to aptly correspond with our nature, might be rendered as the pattern or causes of this crowded way of living. It is said that this crowdedness is due entirely to temporary conditions obscuring our basic nature. So sometimes in the Buddhist context, we would say we are basically samsaric beings, we are basically due to suffer. And sometimes this sadly is how Buddhism is understood. This is not the case. There is suffering, but something can be done about it. From the Mahayana perspective, and particularly from the Vajrayana perspective, this delusion, this pattern that causes this experience is something that's workable. It's not basic to who we are. And that's why from the Vajrayana perspective, we talk about this as fleeting or temporary obscurations. But the different Buddhist traditions and different approaches will speak about the cause as being more or less something that is solid. And of course, they all speak about how they can be worked with, and they're removable, but they have different ways of actually perceiving the quality of these causes that create suffering. So Steven says it's this crowdedness is due entirely to temporary conditions obscuring our basic nature. That is very easy to say, isn't it? What we take to be ourselves is precisely this sense of crowdedness, this sense of disease. In this sense, then, study and practice present ways of recognizing the dynamics of our everyday conditions. Those conditions tend to obscure our possibility of spaciousness as our basic nature. It is as simple and as complicated as that. So what we are doing on the path is beginning to look actually how within our everyday experience our nature gets obscured. So we're talking about something that is very immediate. The science of the Dharma is working with something that is right here, right now, in terms of our immediate experience. So that's why it's something where we ourselves are sitting right in the laboratory, right with the, you could say, the microscope, looking right at the place where this all originates. So it is as simple and as complicated as that. It's something we can deal with right here, right now, but it also, the ramifications of this confusion, of course, is vast. The result of resolving it also is vast, and that's where we speak about enlightenment as having countless qualities. So it's a very important issue. It is as simple and as complicated as that. We forget our habits of reflection are a concrete, total presentation of our distractedness and forgetfulness of such spaciousness. So that's where we are continually missing the point. Steven continues, what we habitually take to be clarity or understanding can, upon further reflection, often be revealed to be entirely conditioned by temporary and crowded modes of reflection. So we very often assume certain realities that, in fact, if we look, don't really have a solid foundation as we might think they are. And that's particularly then, of course, applies to the whole realm of thinking of the universe in terms of a solid, truly existing reality. So that's true. Steven continues, when we discover this, when we discover that what we think of as truth is really just something that's conditioned by temporary and crowded modes of reflection, when we discover this, it is not a matter for despair anymore than we should be despondent when we see clouds in the sky. Only a child or a fool, an idiot, would feel that the presence of clouds meant that life was not worth living. So we might be sort of longing for the sun, and there's clouds in the sky, and we would forget that actually the cloud is there. I mean, the sun is right there behind the clouds. If we forget that, and very often it happens like that, when we're upset and we're sort of held by depression or we're held by some sense of anguish, we very often see our past and our future in terms of that particular present experience. And we forget actually that it's something that will pass. Steven says, in summary, the first noble truth is that we have a crowded experience of life, and the second noble truth involves discovering the variety of factors that constitute this sense of crowdedness. Such a discovery, moreover, is not bad news. Such discovery is the Dharma, because the Dharma is that which is in accord with what truly is. We are here merely reminding the reader that these traditions of higher Dharma encourage us to concretely, honestly, and spaciously begin to discover and acknowledge the variety and modes of upset and crowdedness we all experience. And this is also significant because what we then mean with the Dharma and the path of Dharma and the you could say Dharma as an expression or a means for experiencing reality is that what the Buddha is encouraging us is not to get away from samsara. The thing is, samsara actually is just a product of our ignorance. So the remedy for this is not about us needing to, move to another planet or need to sort of change, really. It's really about us beginning to just take a hard look at reality. And that's where the enlightenment of the Buddha didn't come from going off into some alternative reality, but actually came from looking at our reality presently and seeing through this hallucination, seeing through this delusion, this dysfunction, this crowded space. And so that's where the more we actually look at these variety and modes of upset and crowdedness, the more we actually will be able to see through them. So the solution lies in looking at what is and not running away. So that's where the approach of Dharma is really to see what really is. And that's, of course, also, as we'll be seeing later, is what's implicit in the notion of vipassana, wider perspective, wider seeing. Okay, let's see if there's some questions. Can you please elaborate on, we forget that our habits of reflection are a concrete total presentation of our distractedness and forgetfulness to such spaciousness. I thought we were supposed to do reflection in Buddhist practice. Yeah, we definitely are supposed to do reflection. What we're just talking about here are confused reflections. Yeah, so here we're talking about habitual reflections. They're assumptions, blind assumptions. So we are definitely encouraged to investigate, reflect, analyze, and so forth. But the result of the analysis that we will arrive at is very different from the sort of unanalyzed assumptions, or what he here refers to as reflection, the habits of reflection. And that's where these habits of reflection, they're just actually something that's come up in our ignorance, our distracted condition, our forgetfulness, and us essentially being lost. Again, being, dysfunctional. That's where within that delusional conditions, we've come up with some habits of reflection that are actually delusional. So what we're doing here with reflection is actually beginning to look properly. So, but it is a long sentence. So reflections here means distractedness, too much thinking, creating scenarios in our mind. Well, even not thinking properly, because it's a habit of reflection, in the sense of our habits of reflection are really just the way that we habitually think about things, So it's not even that we've thought too much, we've just sort of jumped to assumptions. So that's what he means with habits of reflection. But they're coming from a place of delusion. So that's where we're going to sharpen up here in terms of our reflection. Yeah. Okay. All right. No more questions. Good. Okay. So next time we will look at the third insight, cessation. And this is the good news. This is the wonderful thing about what the Buddha taught, is that we have suffering. There's a cause of the suffering, and this condition is curable. So that's cessation. So we'll look at that next time. By this merit, may all attain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may all beings be freed. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen, may it never fail, but grow and flourish ever more and more. Thank you. So as usual, we'll take a 2-minute break here, and then I'll say something about meditation, and then we'll do some practice. So just a word about meditation. As we saw before, the purpose with us studying the Dharma is that we're looking at reality, and it's worthwhile looking at reality, because without seeing properly reality, then we are going to be at odds with reality, which is why we suffer. So the Buddha's awakening was in fact discovering what life truly is. It's discovering what we truly are, discovering what reality is. And the Buddha's teaching, the Dharma, is the truth of this. It's conveying reality in the sense of this being what is real, so we can also speak of it as the truth. So really, meditation is just a way for us to begin to experience truth. And this is very different from truth as we very often understand it in terms of an analytical perspective, where we might arrive at, let's say, for example, in mathematics, you can have a correct understanding. You know, we can do addition or we can do equations or whatever, and we arrive at a correct understanding. But that's still something that is an object. And so we very often have within philosophy and so on, we have some sort of idea that truth is something that exists in terms of a particular object of the mind. And that in the Buddhist text, in the Buddhist context, is actually not what we mean with truth. In the Buddhist context, we talk about the individual subjectivity as being delusional and confused, and not seeing truth is something that has to do with a basic condition, which is not about the objects of the mind, but about the one that observes. So it's not an object, it's not something that can be known like an answer, somebody whispering us the mantra, or level 42 or whatever. It is to actually see and be free, actually see within ourselves, but not see as an object, actually to eliminate confusion from our own experience. And that's where meditation enables us to begin to be clearer. It enables us to begin to experience reality. So in that sense, meditation really is what provides the foundation for then a wider perspective, which is what we call vipassana. The conspicuous aspect of meditation, the sitting and not moving and so forth, which, from an ordinary sort of, you could say, fidgety modern consumer's point of view, is painfully difficult, sitting and not doing anything. So that's difficult, but also sometimes also from a sort of you could say from the perspective of that you're only worth as much as you actually do, sort of the Protestant work ethic, that just sitting around not doing anything is practically despicable, scandalous, and so forth. So there's some resistance to this, but sitting and meditating is actually being very proactive. It's actually engaging. It's engaging the best of what we are. It's providing the conditions for clarity to emerge. And so we are definitely being proactive to sit down and to sit properly and to engage beyond just our ordinary dreamy, vacuous ruminations and being sort of gullibly submissive to the narratives that we very often more or less consciously subscribe to. That is being extremely proactive in terms of us cleaning up our act. So that's where the act of sitting, and being properly present, the practice of non-distraction, which we then call shamatha, is really what paves the way for a larger vision of reality, which is then vipassana. So these two elements are really basic to what we call meditation in a Buddhist context. It is what enables us leads us to awakening. We talk about wisdom as being this insight that is not caught up in the deception, the self-deception that drives samsara. So we cultivate that first on the basis of looking and actually trusting our ordinary critical thinking, and that is where we engage in the study of the Buddhist path, and that's where we actually we take in a new perspective. We take in the perspective of the Buddha. Somebody has something to say, but then we validate whether or not this applies. So we're encouraged to first hear what the Buddha has to say, but then we're also encouraged to actually validate or examine whether or not this holds. So that's pretty much what we would do very much in the general traditions of science, and it's what's referred to as epistemology, validating knowledge. So we would have something that's presented as, a truth, but then for us to actually acknowledge that it really is truth, we need to think critically, and that's where the Buddha said, you should not accept my teaching out of respect for my person, but on the basis of your own inquiry, just like you would validate gold before you purchase it. So on the basis of this, then the propositions that the Buddha has made in terms of what drives our suffering and what drives clarity and how we could extract ourselves from it, we then examine whether it's true or not, and then we proceed to actually apply it. And that is where we then practice the third aspect of wisdom, which is meditation. So we talk about three aspects of prajna, wisdom, which is hearing the teaching, reflecting on the teaching, so critically analyzing, verifying the teaching, and then thirdly, then applying the insight in the practice of meditation. And that is where we understand that the confusion that we're subject to comes from this distracted ignorance, and that's where we remedy this with non-distraction and actually breaking free of the ordinary circles of ignorance. And that's where we break free of these habitual reflections, habitual narratives. And that is why we're in meditation, is not that we stop thoughts. Of course, sometimes there's sort of a sort of popular belief that in meditation you don't have thoughts, which you quickly realize that's not happening, or maybe it's happening for the others, but it's certainly not happening for me. I'm having plenty of thoughts. And that's where we're not really about stopping thoughts. We are about not gullibly being controlled by the thoughts. And that's where the practice of mindfulness, where we are aware of the breath, we're beginning to become aware of what's out of our heads, out of our thoughts. It actually paves the way for us beginning to connect to a wider reality beyond just our particular constructions or our particular judgment or our particular attitudes and likes and dislikes. It's seeing beyond really just the self-centered perspective of me and beginning to just connect with space, wider space, spaciousness, as Steven was talking about before. So the practice of meditation is connecting with space. It's connecting with what is beyond my limited ordinary thinking. We're not particularly demonizing our thinking, but it's just that we're not that impressed with it either. So we have thoughts, obviously, but we as we know, we are much greater when we begin to expand our horizons and not be stuck in our sort of particular parochial little ideas and so on. So in that sense, the practice of meditation is seeing beyond what we ordinarily are stuck in, and that's the vipassana. That is the objective of meditation. In the general practice of meditation, and this is really significant, it is this breaking away from our ordinary habitual way of seeing things that enables a wider perspective. And that is the nature of the path. This also brings about a perspective that includes others. So we're not just levitating and floating off into the northern into the northern lights and landing on a different planet. We are connecting with reality, and a greater reality where we're, you could say, more participating. And that's where the notion of compassion is. Compassion and qualities such as loving kindness and compassion, the caring for others, engaging with others, and so on, is a natural outcome, really, of meditation properly practiced. Particularly in a Mahayana context, we're not interested in going into some particular mystical state. We're rather interested in opening up and being at ease with our reality and the reality around us, and seeing reality more for what it is. So, of course, just connecting with reality in an ordinary sense, we would continually be battered around by our likes and dislikes and so on. So reality in this sense, we're not connecting with it in a habitual way, but we are freeing ourselves from this ordinary patterns of self-centered reactive patterns. And that's where we begin to see reality for more for what it is. And that's what we are really interested in terms of the path, according to the Mahayana, rather than going into some particular states of profound concentration and so forth. So there, the natural outcome of such meditation is really a sympathy and a greater awareness of other, that eventually the entire barriers between us and others and the duality that ordinarily drives our suffering falls away. There is continually on this journey a process that we're actually connecting more and more with what we actually are. We're more and more breaking free of this situation of dukkha, where there's a certain dysfunction that's taking place, and more there's a sense of alignment with what is real. What Steven was saying, we're going from dukkha to sukha. We're going from suffering to well-being. We're going from crowded condition to spaciousness. And so we're continually not so much, you could say, becoming higher and higher and higher, but it's more that we're uncovering what was always there. So this condition that was always there is what we sometimes refer to as sugata garbha, or the essence of bliss that is innate to us. And what we refer to as sugata refers really to the Buddha, the one who has gone to bliss. Again, the same su. But this is then also why we sometimes refer to this as Buddha nature. Now, this Buddha nature then is something that is innate to us. And it's not just about us becoming higher and higher and different. In fact, we're going from being rather abnormal, strange creatures that are stuck in our own limited sort of womb or cocoon into a sort of a wider sense of freedom. And we're doing that really breaking away from this self-imposed prison that samsara is. But all along, this nature calls out to us in one way or another, and it's even that enables us to actually not like suffering. And we know that there's something greater than suffering. And it's also that which appreciates truthfulness in our world around us. When we meet selfless people, when we meet truthful people, we have a natural rejoicing. And this particularly then applies when we come across then the teaching of the Buddha and those who uphold the Buddha's teachings, genuine realized beings. Someone like the Dalai Lama, or some of us might have teachers like, for example, Tsongsa Khyentse Rinpoche or Jigme Khyentse Rinpoche, or we might come across even just pictures of great lamas like His Holiness Dunjum Rinpoche or Dilgu Khyentse Rinpoche and so on, where we actually just think, wow, this person is genuine. And this is, despite this, these people might live in a different culture and be different from us, there's some sense of arriving at something that is genuine and true. And in some way, it's as if they are reflections of this nature that we innately have. And so the mere seeing a picture or the mere being in the presence of such a teacher actually brings about and brings out this truthfulness within ourselves. These teachers are never there as persons who would like to just have followers. A genuine guru actually is a reluctant guru. The Buddha didn't want followers like we just saw. The Buddha was even reluctant to teach. What the Buddha would like is for us to be free. What our doctor would like, hopefully, is that we become well. And so often, my teacher, Tsongsa Gyalmen Khyentse Rinpoche, he would sort of discourage the culture of devotion as being something that where we just had sort of a sycophantic adoration for somebody that we just fall in love with and think is wonderful. The teacher's role really is to be there as someone that points to the nature of reality. But seeing then the teacher facilitates that. And again, this is not about something that's intellectual or some sort of something that's the right answer. It's something that just touches us deeply. And so the thinking of the teacher is something that can bring about this condition of just something that feels right. And this is what we refer to as blessing. Blessing is something that can come about when there is this appreciation for the teacher and where that quality of the teacher is recognized within ourselves. It's not just a self-indulgent distraction of being pleased, but rather it's a sense of something really healthy. Just as if we eat healthy food, there's a sense of our whole body sort of, you could say, perking up. And likewise also with the thinking of the teacher or thinking of the Buddha, then there's some quality of just feeling that it's real, it's good, and some sense of yoga in the sense of aligning ourselves with reality. Just like if we sit properly, if we eat properly, then we actually feel good. Our existence feels good. So that's where we're breaking away possibly from habitual sloppiness and habitual reflection and actually aligning ourselves with reality and being good about it. And that is what's implicit in yoga. So in that sense, the presence of the teacher really can facilitate this vipassana. Just like, of course, if we generally practice the Buddhist teaching where we are training ourselves in letting go of our ordinary habitual patterns, then gradually also we'll arrive at this sort of spacious ground of well-being. But in some way, there's a shortcut when there is someone who reflects this, who embodies this, who inspires this. There's a sense of connecting with this right away. And this is what we refer to as blessing. And of course, this is something that we employ a lot in the Vajrayana teaching, where we take through that medium of blessing, we actually take what we call the result as the path. But the practice of recollecting certainly the Buddha is not something that's unique to Vajrayana, but it's something that we find all across the various Buddhist traditions. So presently, Tsongsa Khyentse Rinpoche has been very much also in response to the catastrophes that we are seeing in this presently in the world, encouraged to invoke the image and invoke the memory of the Buddha, to chant the Buddha's mantra, to think of the Buddha, and so forth. We presently daily, in the context of the morning sits now at 7:30, we, after the sitting practice, after chanting the Heart Sutra and the sitting practice, we then do this practice that we also do here tonight, the treasury of blessing. And this is then something that connects us and balances us, aligns ourselves with, then you could say, the natural healing condition that we naturally possess, but that we sometimes lose track of. So while meditation, of course, is really important, then combining it with this invoking the image of the teacher, the guru, however form we choose to do it, is something that sets us on the path really of a direct connection or direct experience of that, which is then what we call blessing. So here then we do this practice, and the practice is structured so that we first take refuge, develop the say the scope of the entire path, which is freeing all beings, and also express the what we call four boundless, the wish that all beings be happy, free from suffering, always have joy, and that all beings have this experience of vastness and equanimity. And on the basis of that, then the main practice is then the visualizing the Buddha. And then we have some devotional liturgies. First is what we call the 7 branches of puja, or the 7 branches of engaging through the practice of homage or bowing down, practice of offering, practice of exposing our neurotic actions, the rejoicing in the sane actions that we do and others do, and so forth, and asking the Buddha to teach, asking the gurus to teach, requesting that they stay in the world, and then aspiring that this may lead to complete enlightenment. So we chant that, and then also we chant a short invoking the Buddha. And with that, we then chant the mantra of the Buddha, just briefly. Essentially, you could say it's a devotional practice of just invoking the Buddha. And then we do some sitting practice. And here tonight, we're not so much accumulating the mantras, just really just, this is the, you could say, the preliminary then for the practice of meditation. So that's where presently in the context of the online format, we're just going to be sitting 15 minutes. And then at the end, we conclude chanting some aspirations and then dedication of merit. So that's the program here. As always, when we're doing the meditation practice, because I was talking a bit about the blessing and so on, but before that I was talking about shamatha and vipassana. So when we're doing the actual, just at the end, when we're after having chanted the mantra of the Buddha, we dissolve, you could say, the reference point of the Buddha as external, and just considering that the Buddha's presence permeates us, then we just settle without any kind of reference point of the Buddha, and just settling the mind like that. It's quite helpful to just not get caught up in the ordinary conceptuality and the ordinary drifting with thoughts and so on, wondering, what am I doing exactly here? So then we just bring the focus back to the breath. So we sit either on a chair or on the floor, however is convenient, and sitting straight as we do in meditation posture. Then we just come back to the breath, and that's essentially where we cut through the ordinary thoughts by just being focused on the breath, particularly the out breath, but just being aware of that. And that's where our focus goes. So of course thoughts will arise, but we allow them to arise, and yet we just come back to the breath as our main object of focus. So in that space, then thoughts will arise, but we don't necessarily tag along with them. We just remain present, clear, aware, connected to where we are through just coming back to the breath. So we'll just take a couple of minutes break, and then here at 6:30, then we'll begin the practice. Okay. I'm just going to cut the webcam and the view of my desktop, because there's something I just want to do. So I'll be right back. 2-minute break anyway. So we'll begin the, hold on. Almost there. Okay. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. May all sentient beings enjoy happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the sacred happiness devoid of suffering. And may they dwell in boundless equanimity that is free from attachment and aversion. As the union of unborn emptiness and the ceaseless appearances of interdependence, magically there appears before me in the sky, amidst vast clouds of offering, on a jewel-lined throne and lotus sun and moon disk seats, the incomparable teacher, lion of the Shakyas. His body, the color of gold, adorned with major and minor marks, clad in the 3 Dharma robes, he sits in Vajra posture, his right hand gracefully poised in the earth-touching mudra, and his left hand in the gesture of meditation holds an alms bowl full of nectar. Like a mountain of gold, magnificent, he shines in splendor, spreading beams of wisdom light across the whole expanse of space. The 8 close sons, 16 elders, and the like, a vast ocean-like retinue of noble beings encircles him all around. Simply think of him, and he grants the glory of the highest bliss, liberation from samsara and nirvana, the 2 extremes. He is the great being, perfect embodiment of every source of refuge. With your great compassion, you embraced this turbulent and degenerate world and made 500 mighty aspirations. You are exalted as the white lotus. Whoever hears your name shall never return to samsara. Most compassionate teacher, to you I pay homage. All my own and others' virtues of body, speech, and mind, together with all our possessions, visualized like Samantabhadra's offering clouds, I offer to you. All the harmful actions and transgressions I have committed throughout beginningless time, each and every one I now confess with intense and heartfelt regret. In all virtuous actions of the noble ones and ordinary beings, accumulated throughout the past, present, and future, I rejoice. Turn the wheel of the profound and vast Dharma teachings, ceaselessly and in every direction, I pray. Your wisdom body is like space and remains changeless throughout past, present, and future. Yet in the perception of those to be guided, you go through the display of birth and death. Even so, let your form body continue always to appear. Through all the virtues I have accumulated in the past, am accumulating now, and will accumulate in the future, for the sake of benefiting all beings who are as infinite as space, may you, the sovereign of Dharma, be forever pleased, and may all attain the state of the victorious one, the Lord of Dharma. Living beings like us, adrift in this degenerate age, have no guidance nor protection. Because of your kindness, caring for us with surpassing compassion, every manifestation in this world now of the 3 jewels is your enlightened activity. You are then our only refuge, incomparable, supreme. So from our hearts we pray with total confidence and faith. Do not neglect the great promises you made in times gone by, but hold us until we attain enlightenment with your compassion. Supreme Teacher, Bhagavan, Tathagata Arhat, complete and perfect Buddha, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni Buddha, to you I pay homage, to you I make offerings, in you I take refuge. Supreme Teacher, Bhagavan, Tathagata Arhat, complete and perfect Buddha, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni Buddha, to you I pay homage, to you I make offerings, in you I take refuge. Supreme Teacher, Bhagavan, Tathagata Arhat, complete and perfect Buddha, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni Buddha, to you I pay homage, to you I make offerings, in you I take refuge. Te yata o muni muni mahamunaya soha. 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 Om 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 muni muni ma Muni muni mamune zo muni muni mamune zo muni muni mamune Om Muni Muni Mahamunaya Soha. From the Buddha's body there emanates a great radiance of multicolored rays of wisdom light, dispelling all our own and others' obscurations and causing all the genuine qualities of the Mahayana path to arise within us, so that we attain the level of perfection from which we will never return again to samsara. So we'll chant the aspiration prayer of Maitreya. I prostrate to all the Buddhas, and to the Bodhisattvas endowed with the divine eye, the sages, and to the Shravakas as well. I prostrate to Bodhicitta, which counteracts birth in all lower realms, perfectly shows the path to the higher realms, and leads to no aging nor death. Whatever negative actions I have done under the influence of an afflicted mind, in the presence of the Buddhas I fully acknowledge them all. By the accumulation of any merit I have created through the three kinds of activities, may my seed of omniscience grow, and may I attain awakening that never ends. Whatever offerings to the Buddhas that can be found in the realms of the 10 directions are known to the Buddhas who rejoice in them. I rejoice in all these offerings. I fully acknowledge all negative actions and rejoice in all merit. I prostrate to all the Buddhas. May I attain supreme primordial wisdom. I earnestly request the Bodhisattvas who reside on the 10 levels in all the direction of the worlds in the 10 directions to awaken into supreme enlightenment. Once you have awakened into genuine enlightenment and tamed the Maras and their hordes, may you turn the wheel of Dharma so that all living beings may be healed. With the sound of the great Dharma drum, may you free all sentient beings who are suffering. Throughout inconceivable millions of kalpas, may you remain and teach the Dharma. Mired in the swamp of desire, entangled in the strands of cyclic existence, I am fettered by all that binds. I supplicate those supreme among humans to look upon me. The Buddhas do not blame sentient beings who are flawed. With a loving heart for all sentient beings, may the Buddhas free them from the ocean of cyclic existence. Any perfect Buddhas who are present, those who have passed away and those yet to come, may I train following in their way and engage in enlightened conduct. Having perfected the 6 paramitas, may I liberate the 6 families of sentient beings. Having actualized the 6 extraordinary faculties, may I reach unexcelled enlightenment. Future phenomena are not born, and those past will not occur. Present phenomena have no inherent nature. There is no actual location. There is no perception. There are no outer things. May I realize the Dharmadhatu of emptiness. According to the Buddhas, the great sages, there are no truly existent sentient beings, no life force. There is no truly existent individual and no nurturing of a self. May I realize the Dharmata, where the self is not present. An entity such as grasping onto a self in mind is not present within any of the paramitas. To benefit sentient beings, may I give with generosity, free of avarice. Since things do not exist as entities, may my wealth appear spontaneously. Since all things totally disintegrate, may I perfect the paramita of generosity. Endowed with a flawless ethics that is guided by rules, and an ethics that is completely pure. With an ethics free of an arrogant mind, may I perfect the paramita of ethics. Just as the elements of earth, water, fire, and wind, bodhisattvas do not remain caught by mental constructs. By attaining patience, anger never arises. May I perfect the paramita of patience. Through the power of previous perseverance, having become stable, enthusiastic, and free of laziness, and through a strong body and mind, may I perfect the paramita of perseverance. Through the samadhi where all is illusion-like, through the samadhi of the hero's stride, and through the samadhi that is like a vajra, may I perfect the paramita of meditative concentration. Through actualizing the 3 gates of full liberation, the equal nature of the 3 times, and the 3 types of knowing as well, may I perfect the paramita of prajna. Through persevering in a bodhisattva's practice, may I attain the kaya praised by all the Buddhas, the luminous kaya and the kaya blazing with majesty. Thus may my intention be fulfilled. May I be like the famed Maitreya who engaged in such a practice, perfected the paramitas, and perfectly abides at the zenith of the 10th level. By this merit may all attain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may all beings be free. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen may it never fail, but grow flourish ever more and more. May the Buddha appear in this world, may the light of the teaching shine like the sun. May the holders of the teachings live in harmony, and thus may all be auspicious for the teaching to endure. We pray for the good health of the teachers. We pray for their precious lives to be long. We pray for their activities to spread and increase. May we be blessed never to part from the teachers. Akashasya stiti avat Yavacha jagataha stiti tavan mama stiti bhuyahat jagadukani nignata akashasya stiti yavacha jagataha stiti tavan mama stiti bhuyahat jagadukani nignata tavan mama stiti bhuyat jagadukani nignata tavan mama stiti bhuyat jagadukani nignata. As long as space remains, as long as the world remains, may I too remain to alleviate the sufferings of the world. Thank you. And hopefully see you again. All the best. Bye-bye.